Hi, this is Tony Levin. You're watching Sonic Perspectives.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another interview of Sonic Perspectives. I'm Rodrigo, and with me today is Scott Medina, another prolific interviewer of our channel. Together, we're going to shred on the bass and talk to the legendary bassist Tony Levin from King Crimson, Stickman, Levin Brothers, Peter Gabriel, and a million other bands and projects. Tony, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm a little tired after hearing about the million projects, but thanks for having me on.
That's all
Yeah,
right.
that's what we're in for. So Tony, despite all of that, we're primarily here to talk about your new album, bringing it down to the bass. But before that, we know that you just finished your annual Three of a Perfect Pair music camp with
Wow.
the King Crimson alumni Adrian Belew and Pat Mastaletto. So I just wanted to check in with you. How did that go this year?
The camp was great. Thank you for doing your homework and knowing what I'm up to, maybe better than I know myself. It's the 12th year we've done it, and the 12th time we've done it. Wonderful group of campers. We call them campers, the musicians who come, about 100 of us now, and it's a very special, very supportive community. Nowadays, these longtime campers get together during the year and practice for the jams that we're going to do in that quick 4 days that we get together in the summer. So it was very gratifying. A lot of socializing, so I'm kind of socially wiped out for the week because it just finished. And even when I live nearby, by coincidence, I live nearby the mountain resort where it happens. So I went to breakfast yesterday, and there were about 25 campers at the breakfast place at the diner. That's good. It's a good community.
Sweet. Are you still in the Woodstock area, Kingston, or something like that?
Indeed, Kingston, New York, which is the city near Woodstock. I
Yeah,
lived in Woodstock for I don't know, 10 or 20 years, and then moved down the road to Kingston.
right on.
And Tony, speaking of the new album, you released many albums under your name, and the last one came out, I think, in 2007. What inspired
Wow.
you to release this new album now in 2024?
Has it been since I've been saying 10, 15 years is wow, 2007.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have this problem finishing an album, and it's a great problem to have, which is that I tour a lot, and
Yeah.
touring and playing live is what I most love to do. I love everything about music, but boy, touring and with Peter Gabriel, King Crimson, Stickmen, Levin Brothers, any of that, and more. Uh, so I keep writing. I'll be home a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks, maybe 1 week, and I'll write some and then put it aside. And also at home, I do a lot. Actually, you're seeing me in my home studio, basses all over the place. Uh,
Yeah.
so I do a lot of recording for other people at home and push. Generally, I push my own stuff to the back of the list. So about a year ago, I decided Peter Gabriel had a lot of touring coming up, and I thought about the future, and I thought if I don't carve out some time to finish this album, it's going to be never. And I got way too much material, and I want to proceed with it. And so I carved out after two tours in January and February. I said March, April, May, I'm going to get the drummers I want on these pieces, if they haven't already played, finish up the guitar parts and decide which pieces. That's a big thing when you have a lot of material, which pieces are appropriate for it. And it worked. And at the end of May, I finished it and turned it into the label, and it's September 12th release.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like it's been a long process that you've really been working on for a while. So
Some of the tracks I wrote quite a while ago, didn't finish. Some I sort of finished, some I redid, and some are brand new.
Oh, gotcha. And in terms of which guests you wanted to include, is that something that you mapped out ahead of time, or was it spontaneous with whoever you were around at the time, or how did all of that work?
Very good question. Thank you for that. It's called Bringing It Down to the Bass, and the reason for that is it's about the bass. By the way, I wanted to accompany the musical album with my photo portraits of each of the basses I played. It's a very self-indulgent album, really about the
Nice.
bass. Uh, And so a lot of the pieces, not all of them, but a lot of them weren't compositions. They began with a bass groove or a bass technique or sound, funk fingers, for instance, or fingernail playing. And I came up with something I thought was worthwhile and made a composition out of it. And then each piece as a very self-indulgent thing, I thought, well, I know a lot of great drummers and I work with a lot of great drummers. So who's the guy that for this track, this particular track, I won't have to say anything about here's what I hear. I want you. That's the easiest way to get the track you want from a rhythm player is to have the player who plays in the way that you kind of hope he will. And so that's what I did. And I think there were 7, 8, 9 drummers, different drummers on different tracks, great players. And each time I got the track back, if I wasn't there with them and I got the track back, it was like, yeah, that's what I wanted. And it kind of, in my opinion, it lifted the material and the quality of the album up. Likewise with the guitar players and the keyboard players, brought it up way past what it would have been if it was just me at home doing it.
Is it like Christmas time when you get the tracks back and hear what they've laid down on it?
You bet. It's a very good analogy. It is. Yeah. A musical Christmas. Yeah.
Well, and there's a wide range of styles on the album. We have the funky shuffle of the title track, more reflective songs like Me and My Ex, and even hard rock on Give the Cello Some. At the same time, you can tell there's a unity in those tracks, like they belong on the same album. What was the thought process to putting these songs together in the same release?
Yeah. Thank you. Great thank you for the compliment, and I'm glad you like it. And thanks for asking a really good question that makes me makes my brain sizzle. Yeah, I had a lot more material, and a lot of it was prog rock, progressive, long compositions that don't feature the bass, and it was really only maybe 6 months before finishing it that I looked at all the material and I said, this needs to have some cohesion, and I didn't toss out, but I put away for the future the progressive rock long compositions, and I favored the ones that were more about the bass. You mentioned Me and My Axe. There's a name that's sort of about the bass, and on that one I thought, well, it'd be really cool to reassemble some Peter Gabriel Band alumni, and I'm very lucky to be in touch a lot with Steve Hunter, the Deacon, a wonderful guitar player that was in Peter Gabriel's first band. We toured together, but before that I had played with him with Lou Reed and Alice Cooper. So I got him to play on it, Larry Fast to play keyboard, and Jerry Marotta to do the drumming. Jerry Marotta, I must be drinking too much coffee if I'm saying my good friend Jerry's name wrong. Part of the fun of that and the kind of historical significance was to reassemble some of the alumni of the band. And that piece, by the way, I had in mind it's very melodic, and I wanted to trade because it's me and my axe and kind of two lead voices, both literally and figuratively in the name of it. I wanted to feature both Steve's great melodic playing and my fretless playing. So I'm playing kind of high and fretless, and we kind of trade off on each other, the melodies.
Nice.
Awesome.
Well, based on what you said about, putting the prog tracks more aside, does that mean we can expect a second volume, maybe like progging it down to the bass or something like that?
Thanks for giving me the title. Yeah, I think I'm like everybody else. You have your list of what you'd like to do, and for me, the one at the top gets all the attention. I've done books and poetry books and photo stuff, and the ones further down the list don't get done. So what I'm going to just say is that's on the list somewhere. I not only don't have a title, I have a lot of the material, but I'm just too immersed in what tours I have coming up. We'll talk about that. And in the album release, I'm too immersed in that to even think of any of the projects, let alone another solo album, which would be at least a year, probably 2 years away.
Totally fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, I'm always interested in how one particular song gets chosen as like the title track, particularly when they're instrumentals. So let's just talk about the title track to this album, and it features Dominic Miller and Manu Katché and Alex Foster on sax.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that one?
Plenty. First of all, when it comes to titles and instrumental titles, I'm in a lot of bands that do Stickman and Levin Brothers, and we do a lot of writing. And the way I am about I'm kind of funny. I'll give the song that I instigate, I'll give it a title right away, however goofy it is. I don't really want to think about it. And then I'll change the title 2 or 3 times or even more, and maybe the other guys in the band will change the title. So by the time we tour, this is a tip, I'm just kind of sharing a typical thing about touring. Somewhere it says the song title on the set list, and we all have to say, well, what song really is that? Oh yeah, that's the one that used to be called this. So here I am on my own without the other guys doing that, but I did change song titles a great deal. Somewhere, if I had, it could be almost a book, the list of song titles, because I'll call it anything when it starts. Okay, so when I let me think. I actually I had the idea for the title of the album quite a while ago, a year ago, and I tried to fashion a song with vocal about that, and it wasn't very good. So okay, I put it aside, and then later, I took this piece, the piece that is now bringing down to the bass, and it kind of it not only starts with a bass groove, but there's a couple times in the song, not because of the title, but there's a couple of times in it that it breaks down to the bass, and I play a different groove, maybe even a slightly different tempo. And I thought, well, that would fit. So I had the title, I had the piece, and I put them together. It's not the ideal answer, but that's the truth. That's the way it is. And let me say about that piece, I brought Alex Foster in, just an amazing sax player.
Mhm.
He was in with 3 horns doing the horn overdubs, and I felt it hadn't happened yet. It was coming. And I thought it's just tragedy to have this guy in here and just play the horn parts. They're good, but just playing the section. So the song actually ended, and I played, not when he was there, but before. I just started another groove on the bass, and I just said to him, you know what, Alex, we're just going to fade out on this. Would you just play something solo on it? And let me tell you something. When you do an album, you listen to it a lot. You hear it over and over again, mixing it and fashioning it. So I've heard all this material a lot. And the thing that I love the most, the thing that really warms my heart, is those few bars he played at the end of that.
Mm.
And it just makes me, of course, it makes me realize again what a talented guy he is, and that's fantastic. But this phenomenon, if you ask guys to come in and play your music, and they say, oh, sure, and they come in and you pay them a few bucks and they go home and they forget about it maybe, but the talent that goes into that and a lifetime of practicing, and it's supreme talent, and kind of that all hits me when I hear those few bars. I hope I'm not overplaying it, but because it's just faded. By the way, when we mixed, I faded out and stopped the bass part, so it was only maybe 30 seconds long, couldn't be longer. And when we went to mix it, I wanted more and more of it. So Kevin Killen, a wonderful engineer, he kept fading it out in a normal way. And I said, oh no, give me a few more bars before maybe the fade will be quicker. By the way, I brought the Kevin Killen in to mix. We've worked a few times through the years, but I thought he was the perfect guy, not only because he's great, but we first worked together on Sledgehammer back the Peter Gabriel
Right.
the So album, and that Sledgehammer sound was I did the playing, but a lot of the sound was his doing. He's really great, and we have a great history at fashioning bass sounds together.
Yeah, he really got that punchy bass on the Sledgehammer in such a
Yeah,
unique way. I'm glad
it
you're
worked
still
well.
working on it, and that's cool. Well, thanks for
Yeah.
explaining that. I was always wondering about that end section of that song. Like, I always think it's track 2 starting up. It's really cool.
Yeah, sorry about that. I knew that. Yeah, like it ended, and then
Yeah.
and I asked the guys, by the way, the other horn players, to noodle in the studio. If you listen carefully, that the song ends and there's like a little bit noodling, so that eventually people will realize, oh no, this isn't another track; it's the same
Yeah.
track.
Right on.
And mine credit and thanks to the record label, Flatiron Recordings, to let me do stuff like that, because it would be
Mm.
quite typical for the label to say, you know what, it sounds like a different track, just snip that off, and I'd be like, oh, but he's played so great.
Right on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And well,
And in
go
the
ahead.
same way, by the way, when I said to them, and I want photos, photo portraits of all my basses that I used on the album, and poems or stories about that bass. And so I'm going to need a big booklet with the CD, with the vinyl, with it, whatever comes out. And they said, yeah, okay. So you got to love that.
Right on. All right.
Awesome. Yeah.
We're going to need a bigger album. Okay.
Yeah. And Tony, the lyrics of Road Dogs caught my attention. It's lightning and rigging and sound check and gigging, packing and loading, etc. Does it feel like Groundhog Day on the road most of the time, or?
I seem to be, I've become a road dog.
Yeah.
I want to tell you a short story of how that came about. I did, um, Road Dogs is a piece that I wanted to feature the funk fingers, these things I play with on my fingers,
Yeah.
uh, um, on some song, and I came up with, I thought, a very good groove and a little melody. Okay, so I'm recording at home, finishing up the writing of the piece, not necessarily the final bass part. And something I've always wanted to do near the end, it kind of goes into a different groove, and I wanted to try the bass through a vocoder. You know what a vocoder is?
Yeah.
You say the words, but it comes up, or the Peter Frampton sound.
Yeah.
You know, I'd never done that, and I always thought it would really lend itself to fretless bass, which almost sounds like a voice anyway. So I had that idea, and I was right here in the studio, and I thought, well, oh, and it'll do this, and how am I going to remember that? Because I don't have a vocoder. So I took out the microphone and I laid down a scratch and I went, road dogs, Nathan, road dogs, thinking, okay, that's what I'm going to play and I'll say that. Eventually I tried a whole bunch of different vocoder things. Sounded horrible. It just didn't work. And there was the vocal. So actually it wasn't intended as a vocal at all. And in a backwards way, I went back to the vocal and I said, well, that's good. And then I wrote those other lyrics that you noticed.
Right. Right. Awesome. Did you patent the funk fingers or not? Is that a patent of yours?
I don't think I patented it. It's certainly nobody else wants to make them, and we've been making them for years. My intention, I'll tell you another long story. We're going to use up all your time. Doing that same soul album, I had Jerry Marotta, the drummer, who I've mentioned, play on one piece, big time. I asked him to play with drumsticks on the bass strings while I fingered the left hand. And that's the way I did the bass track. And then the next year we were touring live with Peter Gabriel, and I thought, well, I can't do that. And I was practicing endlessly with one drumstick. And one day Peter Gabriel at soundcheck walked by me and said, why don't you attach two drumsticks to your fingers? So really, it was Peter's idea. If anyone should patent it, it should be Peter. I experimented with different materials and things like that. The drumsticks would break the strings, and if they were too light, they would bounce off. They'd fly off my fingers and stuff. And when I got it right, I called them funk fingers and went into. I had a guy make them. I think he stopped making them, but my hope was that other bass players would play them a lot. Probably a few have, but I haven't heard of a lot of that. And I
Right.
still have fun bringing them out on the appropriate piece.
Yeah, they're
Right.
legendary at this point. Yeah. So despite the album's title, there's a lot of bass on it, of course, but we also have some cool vocals from you. And I wondered if you could let us know a little bit about the history of your vocal technique, barbershop background or something, because there's these two tracks. One's called Side B, Turn It Over. That's kind of fun. So what can you tell us about the background
Yeah.
of that?
Well, first of all, I have mixed feelings about my vocals. I can sing in tune. I've been singing background vocal my whole life, and I'm just not the guy to have the voice for lead vocals. I know that. There have been times on some of my albums where I want to say something so much with a song that I'll sing it, and it's okay.
Mm.
But this is a case. I always loved Barbershop Quartet. I talked Peter Gabriel into, his first record and his first tour into making a Barbershop Quartet piece out of one of his pieces called "Excuse Me." And really, historically, even King Crimson, I tried to, I failed. But Robert Fripp then released my demo of what I was trying to teach the other guys to sing. So somewhere floating around, there's a King Crimson Barbershop Quartet. Okay, so this album, I intended from the beginning for it to be vinyl if I could, because my records don't usually make it to vinyl, and it will sometime late this year, I hope, be a vinyl, double vinyl.
Mm.
And I write poems and journal in my journal a lot and ideas. So I had this thing about the experience that if you're old enough, the experience of getting up and turning over the record. It's kind of a deep thing when you think about it,
Yeah.
or it could be if I express it well. And so I thought I'll take that poem and I'll make it a barbershop quartet, which is a little out of the ordinary and not what you'd expect on a bass album. And then I left space in the middle for a fretless bass solo, which I got to say, there's a few things on the record that are for sure unique. And I don't know if there's ever been a barbershop quartet of any kind where a fretless bass plays a solo and joins them and then goes away.
Probably not.
So that
Seemed like a
no,
natural to me. I don't know.
yeah, I don't think I'll do it again. But it was my need to express my thoughts and feelings about that event of turning your record over or turning your life around and
Mm,
starting side B.
Yeah.
mm.
Speaking of vocals, I was caught off guard by on the drums, which is basically you reciting the name of most drummers you work with. That must have been fun to record. And is there a nod to Bohemian Rhapsody there towards
Uh-huh.
the end? Yeah.
You're right. And that was, let's look at the lockdown year when we couldn't tour and I was home a lot. In a way, I wish I had devoted that year to finishing this album. I could have,
Mhm.
but I didn't. I did other things. And I spent almost the whole year fashioning well, I'm going to do a vocal choral piece. I'm going to sing all the voices using only the names of drummers that I played with. And that's a lot of drummers, but they don't rhyme or anything. So it wasn't simple. And I had, at that time, I had my studio, there was there was probably 20 pages of an idea or a type of thing. And then I had to try to bring them together. Oh, and I think I did okay with it. And again, I got to use for the last time that same thing. Probably no one has ever done that. I'll just do a vocal with the names, only the names of drummers. And I'm happy with it. It's very different than the rest of the record. And in a way, it's a testament, my little way of okay, the record's about the bass, but let's give some credit and some attention to the wonderful drummers that I've been lucky to work with. And there are a lot of others that didn't make the cut. I couldn't, I had to end it at 5 minutes. And yes, as everybody will know who hears it, there's a little bit of a quote from Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So right about the time I think this album's going to drop, you are getting back out on the road. This is
Yeah.
an exciting tour coming up, the Beat Tour, kicking off in September. So want to check in with you. How are rehearsals going for it? And anything you care to share about it at this point?
Well, while we're speaking, rehearsals haven't quite started. By the time
Oh,
this is
wow.
seen, I will know what it's going to be like. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be very exciting. Adrian Ballou and I are very familiar with a lot of the material from the 80s that we wrote and played live a lot. However, we're also looking at some pieces we didn't play live very much at all. So a lot of practicing, a lot of woodshedding. But then to bring Steve Vai in to fashion something to do with Robert Fripp's guitar parts is fascinating. And Danny Carey playing the drums. It's going to be Danny Carey from Tool, those who don't know who's
Yeah.
playing.
Yeah.
What I haven't seen yet, and it will soon, is where it's going to go, how it's going to diverge from the way we did it in the 80s. And I'm a fan of that. I'm ready for it to go wherever it goes with these great players. And I think, what is it, September 12th, September 13th, the first show, the audience, and we will find out for sure what it's going to be like. It's been very
Yeah.
popular. I'm glad people are buying tickets to the shows. And
Yeah.
it's also an extensive tour. I do long tours, and I used to do longer tours, but this is hearkening back in more ways than one because it's a pretty long tour, 65 shows now in the US.
Yeah. And I'm obviously you and Adrian are King Crimson alumni, so it makes sense that you guys are doing this. But how did Steve and Danny came into the fold and got involved with the band?
Very good question. It's really not my department. Adrian had the idea years ago,
Oh,
and he worked with the management to try to, I don't remember at what point I came on board, certainly when I was asked, but it was a lot of years ago. It's not easy to put together a band for a tour of guys who are very busy touring with other bands. You know what I mean? Their other bands have priority. It was with King Crimson for me and Peter Gabriel until Crimson stopped touring a couple of years ago. And with Danny, it's Tool and Steve Vai, extremely busy. So Adrian worked really hard. He could tell you the behind this, and I'm sure he would be glad to if we
right.
can connect you with him, the behind the scenes story about how he did it and what was involved. But it took years, and we're happy with the lineup, and we're thrilled with the lineup, and we're all excited to see where it goes musically.
Yeah.
Well, good. It's exciting to hear that you're open to, how it might get interpreted differently and where you guys want to go with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's very good material to begin with, but
sure.
really good material often, I find this with King Crimson, really good material opens itself up, especially instrumental material, to grow. Some of the earliest King Crimson parts that I made up from the 80s. The whole history of my time in King Crimson, 40 years, I was trying to get that part better and really get it right. And I was thinking, yeah, one of these days when I really get it right, I'll just play it that way from then on. But I never did. And that's a testament to it being, in my opinion, good writing, good material that allows me that latitude. So this is that way. I would be okay with playing it exactly the same as I did, but I wouldn't be okay with that. I would be varying it, not all the pieces. You know, a ballad where I played, I found the right part, I'll play the same part. But a lot of it I would be changing anyway. But this is a special opportunity because a couple of the guys weren't there in the 80s, and they're going to interpret it as they do.
Right. Is there any chance that you might also do any material from Thrax, since it's kind of a similar era, even though you have the two trios going on?
We're not going to.
Okay. 80,
One
80s.
of the, yeah, one of the decisions we've made, we have a very long song list to choose among of all of the music from the 80s, and then that'll be it.
Gotcha.
As far as I know today, anyway.
Yeah, right.
But there could be a couple changes in that, but there won't be somebody suddenly saying, well, let's open up the 90s and do something from that. That's not going to
Right. Okay. Well, speaking of busy musicians, you seem to have made a career pretty much of playing with musicians who are very busy, and the number of your trios and quartets is just off the charts. But, you know, just to name a few: Bosio, Levin, Stevens, Liquid Tension Experiment, Levin, Torn White had a great album, Bruford, Levin, Upper Extremities, Keegan, Murata, Levin, that was a great bucket list album. So many different combinations. Could you describe, like, do you approach these different configurations in the same way always, and you're just open to what happens in the studio, or is there something else going on for you personally?
Interesting. Thanks for looking all those up. And you didn't even mention, I don't think, Liquid Tension Experiment, which we
Yeah, they're in there. Yeah.
reform. We kept trying. Maybe we'll do it again. We kept the regathering.
Fingers crossed.
Usually they're all different a little bit, but usually with I guess you'd call them the collaborations with 3 or 4 guys. You get together and write the material quickly together and record it quickly. Typically 2 weeks, a week to write it, a week to record it, or even less. Not all of them are that way, but they are. And it's intense. Typically it's intense, and typically it's really fun because you're throwing ideas around, you get to use it all. Typically it's followed by this situation that I've come not to love. You put out the album, you feel really good about it, and you can't tour because these guys are in 4 different bands and they're busy, and nobody said in the beginning, let's get together and write and record and then give us 6 months of an open window. We can't do that. So there's always a little bit of caveat for me that the material can be really good, but there isn't going to be that thing of touring year after year where the material can grow like King Crimson music has, and Liquid Tension. Sorry, we did do 2 tours. And Bruford, Levin, Upper Extremities, we did a couple tours, but short ones, quick ones. So it's a great experience. You get to learn from the other guys, and certainly, I didn't write down the list. That's a long list of the ones I've done. Sometimes you just get together in the studio for a few days and do them, and sometimes it's a much longer process. I know with Liquid Tension Experiment, I'm always in awe of the other guys, how quickly they learn. Typically, John Petrucci will just play a blazingly fast line. He said, let's start with this. And Jordan Rudess plays it immediately.
Right.
Immediately. And then Jordan says, and then what if we follow it by this? And I'm, could you tell me, I have my pen out, and could you just, that first bar, could you just tell me the notes of that? And usually in other situations, I'm the quick guy. I'm the guy who learns fast. But with that band, I'm the slow guy, and they very patiently, well, they understand I'm not going to be able to play the piece until later, until I get it all written down and figure it out, if ever. Sometimes I can't even keep up then. Anyway, it's a good challenge. That's good for you musically, to be kicked in the butt and try to up your game to be on par with the other guys in the band.
Yeah. I have to comment about one of those bands, the trio, the Stickmen, which just finished a tour. I actually saw that tour in Toronto.
Okay.
It was 2 weeks ago at the legendary Horseshoe Tavern. It was incredible and great to see Pat Mastelotto rejoin the band after a health scare.
Yeah. Thanks for coming in. And that's, to me, for sure. Stickmen is a band, not a collaboration. It was a collaboration, the first album, but we've been touring, I don't know what, 10, 15 years and making many records. And I the band, what I look for from a band, if I'm going to be in it, is for it to be distinctive, to have its own voice, which is fine if you have writers that are different than others. And with this band, I made the rule in the beginning, I'm only going to play the stick, not the bass, the Chapman stick, which has, bass strings and guitar strings. And at first, the first year we had another stick player, which was interesting. And we had Pat Mastelotto, the drummer of King Crimson, one of the drummers of King Crimson, who plays acoustic drums, but a lot of electronics and loops and samples. So you get a lot more from each guy. So ideally you have three guys that can sound like six guys. And after the first year, Marcus Reuter came in, who plays not the Chapman stick, but a touch guitar that has the same range, but it's like this instead of like this. I enjoy writing with the band and seeing where we can go. And part of that is because it has its own voice, you hear it and you know it's that band.
Sweet. Tony, if I may, I'd like to kind of do a little experiment here and just throw out to you a few different iconic recordings that you've been on over the years. And if you could just give either, one sentence to remind of your experience of that, or maybe a really brief story, just to kind of get a sense of the breadth of the work you've done. First one would be...
Brief story is a good word to say to me, because I could go on, use your whole hour with this story.
And I'm happy to do an hour for each of these, if you got the time. But let's start with John Lennon, Watching the Wheels.
Well, the song Watching the Wheels, I'd have to listen to tell you anything specific about that. The experience of being called to play with John Lennon, they said it's secret sessions in New York. It was at the Hit Factory, and they said, don't tell anybody about it. And fine with me. And the second day I lived in New York at that time, on the east side, and I got into the taxi and I told him the street, the 48th and 8th, where the Hit Factory is. And he said, oh, that's where they were recording John Lennon's album. And I thought, yeah, a secret. This is really a secret. I didn't even tell him the building. I was just,
wow.
Yeah. Anyway, John's first words to me were, they tell me you're good, just don't play too many notes. And I laughed. I had a chuckle with that because, first of all, I knew I wouldn't play too many notes because I could see how he was afraid. Oh, they say this guy's good, he's going to be busy and technical all over my songs. But also the very direct New York City, say it like it is way that he had was fine with me, because that's where I lived at the time, and that's the way New Yorkers are, and no beating around the bush with that sentence.
Right.
So that was good. It was a wonderful experience, very special. We alternated songs with Yoko's songs, and on Yoko's songs, John would be in the control room with Sean, who was pretty little at the time, and he'd bring tea out, and he was sort of the producer and the tea boy, and she did that on his song. So that was socially an interesting aspect of it. Very sadly, it was only a couple of weeks, and we did also some other sessions with the Cheap Trick players, Rick Nielsen, is it?
Yeah.
And Bunny Carlos. And those weren't used on the album. At one point, it looked like the whole album was going to be redone in a more hard rock way, but it wasn't.
Well, yeah, that's perfect. You don't have to do about the specific song, but just the recording session is great.
I'm thinking maybe Watching the Wheels starts with me doing that hammer-on stuff that I used to play the bass sometimes with a hammer-on technique. And I seem to remember that John heard me noodling in between tracks and said, let's start it out with that, which is very appropriate because the piece on my new album that I played with hammer-on technique is the first one, bringing it down to the bass.
Right on. Nice. All right. Well, how about another John? Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe, Brother of Mine.
Don't remember the piece, well, I vaguely remember it, but I don't remember what I did different on that piece. But I had played a lot with Bill Bruford in King Crimson. He asked me to join not be in the band, but to be the bass player in, my gosh, we're Yes without Chris Squire, which is just wrong. And I was honored, but we went to Montserrat to record the album, a studio that's no longer there on a small island, and it was a pretty wild time meeting the other guys. I don't think, my memory is that I didn't know Rick Wakeman or John Anderson at that time, and I like the album a lot. Mixed feelings about being the substitute in Yes, and later they reformed as Yes, and that's a good thing. The fan in me was happy about that. And about whether I had some thoughts, should I emulate Rick's
Chris's.
Chris's sound, famous Rickenbacker sound. I couldn't do it exactly, but I could have gone in that direction, and I ended up comfortable with what I did, which was to do. Actually, I don't mean on the recording of the new material. I mean when we toured and did the Yes material, and I felt like the right call is to be myself and have my own sound, but to pay tribute to the classic bass lines that he played and play them as well as I could. And I had the same experience for years with King Crimson when in the 2000s we began to do classic King Crimson material with John Wetton's bass parts. I tried to, I don't know how to put it in words, but musically I gave a lot of thought and a lot of maybe some angst to how to approach this, and I tried to be true to what's classic about that bass part, and doesn't want to be lost at all, but still to be myself playing that part, not to really try to copy it.
And I don't remember when you toured live with ABWH, since Chris always played with a pick and had so many notes. Did you funk finger it, or what did you do to keep up with that? Your fingers just go fast enough?
That's a great question. I did funk finger because, and I remember because up until then I had played a little bit with King Crimson and with Peter Gabriel, and the parts weren't that fast. They weren't that hard, and I couldn't play Chris's parts with them. And I had a house on Cape Cod at that point, and I went and secluded myself for a month, the month of May before the tour, doing nothing but practicing with funk fingers so I could try to play Close to the Edge with funk fingers. And such as it is, that's what I did. I won't promise that I aced it, but I was able to hold my head up every night when I did it on tour. So that was really the what instigated my practicing a lot with funk fingers and upping my technique a bit.
Nice. I just saw John last night playing Close to the Edge with the Band Geeks, so he's still at it, just so you know.
And I've heard his voice is great, and I've heard the tour is going well. That's wonderful.
It is. He's turning 80 and sounds like 50 years ago. It's ridiculous. All right, I'll just ask you one more. I got a long list for this, but your stories are so good. I'll just do one more.
Thank you.
In the same line, you had to step in on Pink Floyd when Roger Waters went missing, and One Slip has a pretty nice bass groove. And what was that experience like for you?
Once again, I'm going to pass on the individual song because I don't remember, but I have a bad memory for song titles. So hearing it is, oh yeah, it's that and all that.
Sure.
But I don't organize it in my musical brain doesn't set it up with the title. Maybe because I have that thing where I change titles all the time. Like wow. First of all, it was Bob Ezrin, the producer, who called me for that. Now, historically, listen to this. He called me to play on Lou Reed's Berlin album, a little bit on it, a couple of Alice Cooper albums. Back when I was a New York, so you could say a session musician who I played rock, but I didn't tour with bands or anything. And he just heard in my playing something that worked for him. And he brought me into these really serious rock situations. And then he called me to meet this young guy that I hadn't heard of, Peter Gabriel, who was doing his first album, who had left the band Genesis, which I hadn't heard of. And so, boy, thanks to Bob. By the way, that same day in July 76, in Toronto, in Yorkville, is that what it's called? Yorkville?
Yorkville.
Yeah, there was a studio there, and I met Peter Gabriel and I met Robert Fripp on that same day. And I'm still making music with both of them.
History in the making.
Yeah. Yes, I'm very glad that I showed up for that day.
That was a good day.
Yeah. So anyway, many years later, Bob said, come on out and play in this Pink Floyd album because Roger Waters wasn't playing in the band. And it was David Gilmour was very much in charge of the music. Bob, of course, was in charge of the recording. Great. David's a great guy, and it went easily, and wonderful players they had on it. And so it was a pleasure. Really behind the scenes, I think it was in the month of May, and they had a year-long tour scheduled for September. And David asked me if I could do it. And maybe I should be embarrassed even
I've
to
been
tell the
curious why
story.
you didn't tour with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was then in May returning a couple of weeks later to the end of the Peter Gabriel tour, which ended about the same time, ended in early September. And I said to David, I hope I have this right. I said to him, I'm not sure I can do it, but would you mind postponing your tour a couple of weeks so I can finish this other tour? He gave me just the sweetest smile. And he said, well, the first two shows just went on sale and we sold 80,000 seats for the first two nights. And I
Jeez.
started doing some quick math about what I was asking in my naivety, what I was asking him to do is never mind those $5 million that you've been paid
Yeah.
already for those. I'm a little busy. I'll come in later. And it didn't occur to me that there'll be rehearsals too. So I would have liked to do it, but I wasn't going to bow out of a Peter Gabriel tour to do it.
Gotcha.
And another David a sign of what a sweet guy he is much later, a year later, about a year later, they were ending their tour in New York, and he was thoughtful enough to call me and ask me to come to the show. So how nice is that? The guy who was too busy to do the tour.
Right on.
Yeah.
Last question,
Yeah.
Scott. Yeah. We have to ask you about the Levin brothers, where you play with one of your main influences and inspirations, your own brother, Pete Levin. I saw one of your tours here in Toronto in early 2020, right before COVID. Are there any plans to tour with them at this point, or?
Yeah, Levin Brothers is. Well, I've been making music with Pete since he's 3 years older than me. So since I picked up the bass,
Right.
I follow in his footsteps. Except Pete's a jazz player who plays rock, and I think I'm a rock player who plays jazz. I don't live jazz, and I hear it in my playing when I play jazz. I'm there, but I'm not as there as I would be if I lived that life. But I, as a kid, he could buy records before I could buy records, so I was listening to his records, and I was very influenced by especially Oscar Petterford, the great jazz bass player that he listened to a lot. So Levin Brothers is a very very valid band. We toured as a quartet, and thank you for coming to that show in Toronto. And we like to tour whenever we can. I'm busy with a lot of other tours, so when I see a period coming, I hope you can't hear my dog barking. Maybe the dog wants me to go on tour.
Maybe.
Yes. So when we can fit it in, we book a tour and we do what we can, usually shorter tours than the rock tours. A couple weeks we throw in whenever we can. Will we do it again in the future? Certainly we will. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. And it's up to you if you've got time or not, but anything you want to share about the recent Peter Gabriel tour? Any stories how that, because I mean, that was a long time coming about a new album.
Yeah.
Huh?
Well, I will say that I only have a couple more minutes, and then I will say, yeah, this last tour of Peter's surprised me because it was so moving. They're all moving and they're all very special, but somehow this one was just the most moving shows I've ever done.
Wow.
Ever done. Something about his voice and what he was singing about and the material is very unusual and very bold of Peter, typical of Peter, to be bold and break the rules. Usually you just don't bring out a whole lot of new material that the audience hasn't even heard yet. It hasn't even been released yet, and expect to enjoy the show. He did do some classic pieces, of course, but they got it. The audience got it, and I'm sure anybody who is hearing this, who was at the shows, will understand what I'm talking about. It was just very moving, and believe me, it was the same for us on stage. Even though I played all these years and all these concerts with Peter, it was the same on stage as it was for the audience.
I can testify to that. I was there.
Yeah.
It was
Oh,
amazing.
good. I'm
And
glad.
if you can
I think
play it, yeah, go ahead.
it kind of warms my heart just to meet someone after a Stickman show or something, and they say, I was at the Peter show, and I know that we shared something special that I can't put in words.
Absolutely. It's so true. And if you can ever plant a seed with him, how cool would it be if he played at the new Sphere venue in Las Vegas? It
I'll
seemed like
take it.
that's made for him.
I'll take anything he does. I hope he does more. There's no plans at the moment, but I hope, like any fan, I hope there'll be more.
Brilliant. Rod, you want to close this up here?
No, thank you so much, Tony, for everything. I will see you with Beat here at Massey Hall in Toronto in a few weeks.
Great. Thank you for thanks for coming to that. And I look forward to seeing you. And thanks for having me on.
Awesome.
Sweet. Thanks so much, Tony. Really appreciate
Sure.
it.
You
And
guys are great.
congratulations. Good luck on the upcoming rehearsals.
Thank you. You guys are great. You really do it well. Thank you.
Take
Sweet.
care. Bye.
Cheers.